At the reading of the will, my parents beamed as the attorney handed Vanessa a check for $10 million. Then, without missing a beat, they turned to me and said, "Go make your own fortune." I didn't shed a tear. I didn't even blink. I just stared blankly at the polished surface of the table, pretending I couldn't hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then something shifted in the room. A distinguished older man in a charcoal suit stood up. "There's another document," he said, opening a time-worn envelope covered in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. My mother's smile vanished. My father's fingers fidgeted. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. That envelope changed everything. It marked the start of a storm that would unravel every carefully crafted lie they had constructed, and it all began in a place I hadn't set foot in for more than a year. My grandfather's ranch just beyond the edge of Charleston, where the wind once whispered comfort and now carried secrets heavy as stone. I hadn't returned to the ranch since the spring before he passed away. Strange how a place so familiar could suddenly feel so alien. Gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of the car, and the porch wind chimes, once the backdrop to iced tea and warm afternoons, now rang with an eerie hollowness, like ghostly echoes of something gone. I paused before knocking. The white paint on the front door was still peeling, as it always had been. The magnolia trees still leaned slightly eastward, but somehow I didn't feel at home. When the door creaked open, I half expected silence. Instead, I heard, "So, you finally made it." My grandmother's voice hadn't changed, still sharp enough to slice through glass. Her arms were folded, her jaw rigid. I stood still, searching her face for anything. Kindness, relief, surprise. But there was only frost. "Grandma, what's happening?" I asked, stepping forward. "They said you were busy, that you didn't want company, that you had moved on." Her voice trembled for a second, then hardened. "Your grandfather called for you every day before he died, Claire. Every day." I swallowed, my mouth suddenly parched. "That's not true," I called. "I came by in March," Vanessa answered. "She said no one was around." Grandma's eyes narrowed. "We were here. We never left." There was a long silence, jagged and painful. Then she turned and walked away without another word. I followed her inside. The air felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. She returned with a weathered leather notepad. "This is the number he kept dialing," she said, placing it in my hands. I knew his handwriting, immediately strong, deliberate, with a hint of slant, but the number written down, "It's not yours." "Grandma, this isn't even close." "To my number. I've had the same one since college." She stared at the page, her brow furrowed. "They told us you changed it, that you didn't want to be found, that you were ashamed of your roots." "No," I said, leaning back against the wall, trying to steady myself. "They lied. They kept you away from me on purpose." Her hands shook. Slowly, she collapsed into the old floral armchair near the hearth, as if her strength had drained away. "They said the funeral was at noon," I whispered. I arrived at the church, but it was empty. She looked up, her expression pale. "The funeral was at 9, she murmured. "They told everyone you didn't come, that you didn't care." My breath caught. I would never have missed his funeral, never. For a moment, silence hung in the air like a curtain, and then I felt the dam inside me cracking. My chest tightened, my eyes blurred. I dropped down beside her and held her hand like a child desperate for comfort. "I didn't know," I said softly. I had no idea he was even ill until it was already too late. Her tone softened, her fingers brushing mine. "What matters is the truth. And now we finally have it." We sat together for what felt like hours. The silence wasn't awkward, it was dense, filled with everything we had never said aloud. The old mantel clock ticked louder than I remembered. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring dry leaves across the porch like unsettled memories. Eventually, Grandma rose. Her hands quivered, but her eyes burned with purpose I hadn't seen in years. "I'm calling them," she declared, calling. "Who?" She didn't reply immediately. She crossed the room to the rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall, the same one Grandpa had stubbornly kept, and began dialing. Each turn of the dial felt intentional, weighted, like punctuation to a speech she'd been rehearsing silently for years. I watched her hands, worn with age, yet firm with determination. When the call connected, her voice was sharp and cool. "Betty, I need you, Jacob and Vanessa here, immediately." A faint objection crackled through the receiver, but she interrupted it. "No, this can't wait. Be here in an hour." She hung up without saying goodbye, then turned to me. "The lawyer is on his way too." I blinked. "Grandpa's lawyer?" She nodded. "Yes, your grandfather left specific instructions. He wanted them read aloud only when everyone was present. So that's what we're doing." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I just nodded. For the next hour, I sat at the small kitchen table, tracing the edge of the wood with my finger. That same table where Grandpa once sipped black coffee well. Flipping through the science journals I sent him from school, where he first asked about my communications research, where I told him I wanted to study plant memory. And he didn't laugh. I scanned the kitchen. Same old curtains, same hum of that vintage fridge. Yet the atmosphere had changed. Footsteps echoed across the porch. The doorbell rang. Grandma placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "Stay here. I'll call you when it's time." From the kitchen, I heard them come in one by one. My mother's syrupy voice. "Wow, it smells exactly the same in here." My father's calm and practiced tone. I thought this matter was already settled. Vanessa's tired groan. "Really?" This couldn't wait until the estate was finalized. Then silence, followed by Grandma's voice icier than I had ever heard it. "Sit down. Mr. Harold Keene will be here shortly to read Walter's final directives." I could picture their faces confused, maybe annoyed, definitely suspicious. They had no idea I was here. No clue what was coming. And truthfully, neither did I, but deep down, I wished just once that someone would finally say aloud what I'd known all along, that what they did wasn't love. That silence, exclusion, and manipulation weren't simple misunderstandings. They were choices. Cruel ones. They had chosen this. Every cruel silence, every manipulated moment, they weren't accidents. They were choices. The front door groaned again, the hinges creaking under a new presence. I heard a voice measured, precise, unmistakably professional. "This won't take long," the man said, "but it must be conducted properly." That was my signal. Grandma's voice echoed from the other room, firm and clear. "Claire, come in." My legs felt like steel. My heartbeat roared in my chest. I rose slowly, inhaling deeply, and stepped forward through the kitchen doorway into the living room. 3 heads turned at once. The moment they saw me, their masks cracked out. My mother's smile froze mid-lip. My father's jaw tensed hard. Vanessa's complexion drained to white. The air turned charged, sharp with shock like a sudden lightning strike in a clear sky. They didn't just look surprised, they looked scared. Their eyes locked on me in stunned silence. My mother blinked like she was seeing an apparition. My father adjusted his collar, an old nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. Vanessa opened her mouth, but nothing emerged. It was as if someone had ripped the script out of her hands right before opening night. I kept my shoulders square, my chin high. If they were expecting me to shrink into the shadows, they were in for disappointment. Grandma motioned toward an armchair opposite them. I walked over calmly, lowered myself onto the cushion, and settled my breath. Mr. Keene. The attorney gave me a brief, not formal, unreadable, then unlatched his weathered leather briefcase. From it, he drew a thick manila envelope. "This," he began, "is the last will and testament of Walter Orr Whitman. It has been recorded, sealed, and prepared per his final instructions." Alongside the legal documents, he included a personal letter to be read aloud. No one said a word. Mr. Keene cleared his throat and started reading. "To my wife, Margaret Whitman. Grandma remained still as stone. I bequeath the ranch and family home, along with ample financial support for her comfort and well-being. She knows where to find what's left." He turned the page. "To my granddaughter, Claire Whitman." The room froze. I felt the air squeeze tighter around us. "I leave the Whitman Research Annex, located at 317 Laurel Creek Road in Charleston, including all associated laboratory equipment, funding reserves, current research patents, and registered intellectual property held under Whitman Innovation." Someone gasped. Not me. My mother's gaze darted toward Vanessa like a chess player cornered too soon. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. Mr. Keene continued. "And finally, the remaining assets of my estate, including bank holdings, investment portfolios, and retirement accounts, shall be split evenly between my two granddaughters, Claire and Vanessa Whitman." There it was, a quiet detonation. But the real blast hit a second later. Vanessa jolted up from her seat. Her chair screeched across the hardwood floor. "What?" she snapped. "He left her the annex? The entire facility?" Her voice broke at the edges. "That's insane. You told me." She jabbed a trembling finger toward our parents. "You promised. If I kept showing up, if I smiled and stayed polite, everything would be mine." My father's lips pressed into a thin, hard line. My mother stared down, hypnotized by the floorboards. I stayed where I was steady, watching as the truth peeled their illusions apart. Mr. Keene raised a hand, calm and deliberate. "There's additional content. Mr. Whitman also wrote a personal message to Claire, which he insisted be read aloud in the presence of the family." Vanessa gave a hollow laugh, bitter and sharp, but no one echoed her. Grandma opened a drawer beside her chair and handed over a folded sheet. "He wrote this the week before he passed," she said. "He made me swear I'd see it through." The attorney unfolded the note with care. The familiar handwriting bold and sure covered the page. Mr. Keene began. "To my beloved Claire, if you're hearing this, then I've already left this world. But my faith in you remains unshaken and eternal." The words swept over me like sunlight cutting through cold glass. "You were always the quiet one, the listener, the questioner, the soul who asked why when others never thought to." Vanessa sank slowly back into her chair. My mother twisted her hands in her lap. My father turned his face toward the window, pretending not to hear. "You forged your own truth in a house that never honored it." Something within me stirred. It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was something deeper: recognition. You were never a burden, never a mistake. You were my greatest legacy. Tears welled up, but I didn't look away. I wanted them to hear it. Every word. Mr. Keene's voice remained calm, but carried weight, each line a scalpel against the silence in the room. "I remember when you were 7, scribbling in that little red notebook, counting how long it took rain to fill a cup. I remember the joy in your eyes when you saw patterns in what others called chaos." My throat constricted. "That notebook was still tucked away in a box under my bed. I saw how your smile faded every time your mother dismissed your wonder. How your father changed the subject when you shared something beautiful." There was a sharp breath behind me. My mother, perhaps. Vanessa was easy for them. She sparkled in ways they understood. But you, Claire, you glowed in a language they never learned. And instead of listening, they shut the door. Vanessa shifted again, arms wrapped tightly across her chest. I don't blame her entirely. She played the part they handed her. But you wrote your own part. That takes courage. A single tear slid down my cheek. I didn't bother to wipe it away. I remember when you won your first science fair. You asked me to hide the trophy. You said maybe if I don't show it, they'll stop looking at me like I don't belong. A painful exhale came from across the room. My father? You deserve celebration, Claire, not invisibility. I cannot erase what was done to you, but I can give you something sacred space to build, to dream, to be unshadowed. Mr. Keene folded the letter. The hush that followed wasn't silence, it was saturation. The walls, the floor, the air, all saturated with clarity. I swallowed, hard, and broke the stillness. I remember that science fair, I said, voice low. Mom didn't come. She was at Vanessa's dress rehearsal. Vanessa flinched like I'd touched a bruise. I came home holding that trophy like it was something shameful. My father finally spoke, his voice controlled. Claire, this isn't the moment to reopen old wounds. No, I said sharply. My tone razor-edged. This is the only moment. Because all I've ever heard from either of you is, why can't you be more like your sister? I turned toward Vanessa, and from you. Every time I was proud of something, you twisted it into competition. Like my existence was a threat to your spotlight. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You've always made yourself out to. Be the victim. I earned what I had. I nodded once. You mean you visited Grandpa when it served your interests? You smiled when it benefited you. You treated love like a transaction. You said the right things because you thought it would get you something. Vanessa's jaw clenched. Her eyes sharpened. And what are you pretending you're some kind of saint now? You vanished for years. No, I snapped my voice. Cutting through the tension, I was erased. You told Grandma I didn't want to see her. You gave Grandpa a fake number and made sure I never got his calls. That wasn't distance, that was exile. My mother abruptly stood up, anger flickering across her face. Enough, Claire. You're twisting the narrative. This family's been through enough heartache. This family, Grandma interrupted, her tone slicing through the air, has lived in denial. And I allowed it for far too long. Mom turned toward her, visibly stunned. Mother, please don't. I watched every one of you ignore Claire's pain. Grandma continued, her voice unwavering. I believed you when you said she stopped caring, but I should have known better. My father shifted awkwardly, fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve. Look, Claire got her education, her summer programs, her travel. That didn't come cheap. No, I said, locking eyes with him. It didn't, but none of it came from you. Grandpa paid for all of it. Every tuition, every plane ticket, every research journal. He was the one who knew where I was, what I was doing. You didn't even ask. I was never your responsibility. I was your inconvenience. He made me feel real. Vanessa stood, her voice rising. This is absurd. I was told everything would. Go to me. I earned it. I stayed. I was the good daughter. No, I replied coolly. You were the actress, the golden child. I was the one in the wings, the invisible one. But Grandpa never forgot me. And you don't get to write me out of the story now. Vanessa's face contorted. Why should you get anything? Because you're some tragic little genius in a lab coat? I let a small smile play at the edge of my lips. No, I'm getting something because I never faked his love. I didn't bargain for it. I didn't rehearse it. I earned it with honesty. That's the one thing you never figured out. Love isn't applause. It isn't a performance. Then Grandma rose from her seat. She walked to the center of the room with a deliberate stillness that was stronger than any outburst. Her voice was low but resolute. I regret that Walter left you anything, she said to Vanessa without blinking. You may have smiled at him, but you never loved him. You played a role. and I am ashamed that I didn't see through it sooner. She turned to face all three of them. Leave, now. None of you are welcome here anymore. My mother gasped. Mother, you can't mean that. Out, Grandma repeated, her voice steady as stone. Now. For a moment, they didn't move. Then Vanessa grabbed her purse, her heels striking the floor in angry rhythm as she stormed out. My parents followed, stunned into silence, murmuring about legal options and contesting the will. But for the first time in my life, they were leaving. Without power. They walked out with nothing. The door closed behind them, not with fury, but with finality. A clean, quiet click. I remained where I stood, breath caught, unsure what to feel. The silence that settled wasn't bitter or broken. It was peaceful. Grandma moved past me slowly and sank into the sofa. Her hands, which had trembled before, were now still. Calm. They'll come back, I whispered. Maybe, she said. But this time, we don't have to open the door. It took a moment for that truth to sink in. For most of my life, I had been surviving under a silent agreement. If I performed well enough, if I accomplished enough, if I never asked for too much, maybe I'd finally be invited in. Maybe they'd call me daughter, sister, family without hesitation. But standing there in the quiet aftermath of my grandfather's words, I understood something devastatingly simple. I'd spent years begging for love from people who never possessed it to give. And Grandpa? He'd seen that truth long before I ever could. I need some air, I said. Grandma nodded. I slipped out the back door onto the porch. The floorboards groaned beneath me, the sound strangely comforting, familiar. But now it signaled something different. Change. The magnolia trees were still blooming at the edge of the property. Beyond the fence was the red earth field where Grandpa once helped me build my first greenhouse. It had collapsed within 2 weeks, but he'd called it a perfect disaster. We'd laughed about it for years. I thought of that version of me 10 years old, dirt under her nails, stars in her eyes, and I wondered how long she'd been buried beneath the weight of everyone else's expectations. When I came back inside, Grandma was placing a kettle on the stove. Her movements were slow, but every gesture felt intentional. You know, she said as the flame clicked on, Walter started planning that annex 5 years ago, long before the doctors said anything. I stared at her, surprised. 5 years? He told me he wanted you to have a space where you didn't need to ask permission to be who you are. That's when the tears came. Not messy, not loud. Just quiet, clean release. That night, I slept in my childhood room for the first time in over a decade. The wallpaper had faded. The bed was too soft. But the glow-in-the-dark stars were still clinging to the ceiling. Grandpa had helped me place them every constellation accurate. I'd insisted. He'd never questioned it, lying there in the soft dark. I realized something else. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It didn't carry the echoes of things unsaid. It felt like it had been reclaimed. The next morning, I brewed coffee and set 2 mugs down on the kitchen table, the same one I used to avoid whenever my parents visited. But now, it wasn't their table. It was ours. Grandma gently folded the newspaper in her lap and offered me a weary but affectionate smile. So, what happens now? She asked, softly. I think I go see it, I replied with quiet certainty. The annex, the laboratory? She nodded. Knowingly, he would have liked that. I turned my gaze toward the window. Sunlight filtered peacefully through the magnolia branches. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel compelled to flee, to justify myself, or to seek approval. I no longer felt unseen. And that more than any fortune, more than any financial inheritance, was the first genuine gift this family had ever given me. The one person who had truly believed in me left behind something deeper than a legacy. He left me the freedom to start over. When I first laid eyes on the annex, it hardly resembled a scientific facility. It looked more like a repurposed barn, and that's precisely what it was. Tucked away at the end of a dusty lane off Laurel Creek, the structure had thick wooden beams, a weathered tin roof, and broad double doors that seemed better suited for stabling horses than conducting experiments. But once inside, everything changed. The interior was extraordinary. Modern glass panels stretched across the eastern wall, welcoming in golden morning light. Work tables were systematically arranged, adorned with pristine lab instruments, microscopes, centrifuges, data, tablets, even a brand new 3D printer still wrapped in its original packaging. Storage shelves bore sealed boxes labeled with my name, and in the heart of the room sat a sturdy workbench. Resting atop it was my childhood science notebook, the one I'd believed was long gone, lost during my college years. Its pages were torn, the handwriting chaotic, filled with hand-drawn diagrams of honeybee communication. My legs nearly collapsed beneath me. Grandpa hadn't simply constructed a lab for me. He had created a sanctuary for my mind. In the following weeks, I relocated to the annex full-time. I brought in 2 former classmates from my graduate program. Tara and Mike are brilliant, idealistic, and just as relentless in their belief that science could remain profoundly human. We began modestly, securing a small grant to explore microirrigation techniques, then collaborating with a local farming cooperative to test sustainable crop rotation strategies. We made errors. Equipment burned out, data models failed. Tears were shed over rejected proposals. But every day, without fail, we came back. I unlocked the doors to a space that never demanded I explain my worth. A space where no idea was mocked, only examined. A space where being intense, quiet, or intellectual wasn't something that required apology. One evening, after receiving an especially harsh funding rejection, I found myself alone in the annex. My team had gone home. The lights were low. I sat on the floor beside the storage closet, surrounded by printouts, folders, and half-empty coffee cups. From my bag, I retrieved Grandpa's letter, the one I had begged Mr. Keene to let me keep. I unfolded the paper, found the line I had already memorized, and whispered it aloud to the silence around me. You wrote your own role. It wasn't just kind advice, it was a directive. That night, I drafted an entirely new proposal, not for more irrigation tools, but for something that touched the roots of who I was. A youth science initiative for rural schools. A program designed for kids like the one I used to be, inquisitive, introverted, overlooked. We called it the Little Scientist Initiative. During our first year, we served just a dozen students. They came from small towns where schools relied on outdated books, and no child had ever seen a microscope in person. We gifted each student a leather-bound journal, an exact replica of mine, with Grandpa's words inscribed on the opening page. Write the things they don't understand. One day, the world will. That autumn, a timid girl named Amber 13, always hiding behind her hair, approached me with pages filled with her observations of bee behavior. Her calculations were rough, her sentence structure erratic, but her thinking absolutely brilliant. When I told her as much, she stared at me as if I had handed her the moon. You actually read it? She whispered. I smiled warmly. Of course, I did, and at that moment I understood. This wasn't about reclaiming something that had been taken. It was about planting something brand new in richer soil and watching it flourish without fear. 3 years after the will had been read, I received an unexpected email. It was from a legal representative, not Mr. Keene, but a lawyer working on behalf of Vanessa Whitman. The subject line was brief: request for visit. Claire Whitman Innovation annexed. At first, I braced myself. I assumed it was a legal challenge, an attempt to contest the will, reopen old family grievances, or unearth some fragment of the past we had finally laid to rest. But when Vanessa appeared, I barely recognized her. The high-end fashion, the polished hair, the layers of makeup gone. She wore no cosmetics, only a navy coat that hung too loosely over her frame. She entered the reception area with hesitant steps, as if afraid to take up space. I stood beneath Grandpa's portrait above the front desk. Vanessa stopped when her eyes met his image. "He always saw you," she said softly. "Even when I didn't, especially when I didn't." I was momentarily speechless, so I simply nodded. "I'd like to see it," she murmured. "The lab, the work, what you've built." I could have turned her away, but I didn't. I showed her around. She walked beside me through the greenhouses, the experimental crop zones, and the hallway where our little scientist initiative had student photos on display. She didn't say much, just asked some sincere questions. How? Is this all funded? What's the function of this tool? Do students get to publish what they discover? When we reached the community garden, an area where neighborhood families used her techniques to grow their own produce, she stopped in her tracks. Kids were picking lettuce. A mother and her son were laughing near the compost station, and a dad was using one of our soil sensors. Vanessa turned to face me. Her voice trembled. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." I remained silent. "I only wanted to see what he built for you and what you've made of it." She didn't shed tears, but her hands fidgeted, pulling her sleeves, tracing invisible shapes along the edge of the railing. I let her stay as long as she needed. No judgments, no payback. Just truth. We rarely talk, but twice a year now, Vanessa volunteers at the youth science camp. She coaches kids on how to present their findings, how to explain complex results in everyday language, how to stand tall and speak clearly. The students adore her. Some even call her Coach V. After her first summer volunteering, she gave me a folder. "I put together a guide for the quieter kids," she murmured, slightly sheepish. "Thought it might be useful." I rated that night. It wasn't flawless, but it was kind, sincere, and honest. And for the first time in my life, I saw a side of my sister that didn't scare me. She never said the words, "I'm sorry," not outright, but she keeps showing up. That's more than I ever thought I'd get. And maybe it's enough. We're not sisters in the way most people mean it. But in this tiny place born from Grandpa's dream, we've stopped pretending. And maybe that's what real beginnings look like, Dot. It's been 6 years since the will was read. 6 years since my parents and Vanessa walked out the front door, their footsteps echoing like the end of a play no one applauded. I haven't spoken to my parents since. Occasionally, their names show up in unread emails, mentions, and charity updates or business articles from Florida where they retired early. I don't hate them, but I don't miss them either. What stays on my mind is the work. The annex has evolved into something far beyond what I imagined. That one converted barn has turned into a full-scale research facility for laboratories. 3 greenhouses and over 60 acres of experimental fields. We've engineered drought-tolerant seeds that now nourish thousands in regions of the South where conventional crops won't grow. We've partnered with universities from Brazil to Kenya, spreading knowledge in regenerative agriculture. Just last month, I stood on stage in San Francisco to accept a national grant for climate innovation. The lights were harsh, but I didn't blink. I wore a navy suit with Grandpa's old pocket watch tucked in my jacket. Grandma had given it to me last year. His initials were faint, but still there. Inside, a tiny photo of me at age 10, standing proudly beside my honeybee communication project. Smiling so wide it looked like joy itself. He carried it every day. Grandma had said, "Dot, now it rests." on my desk at the annex, right where the sunlight hits in the morning, casting bright halos over my research notes. Some days I speak to him not out loud, just in silence. When an experiment fails, when a scholarship gets awarded to one of our kids, when I remember how close I came to thinking I didn't matter, he never let me disappear. Not completely. And now I finally understand why. A legacy isn't some grand statue. It's a trail of path built from choices, from care, from tiny beacons left behind for someone else to follow when the world tries to forget them. These days, Grandma lives in a little apartment attached to my home in town. She moves slower now and forgets more than she used to, but when it matters, she's sharper than anyone I know. Every morning, we share coffee in the sunroom. She tells me new stories about Grandpa, how he planted a tree just to propose, how he believed soil could store love, how he always knew I'd find my way back. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had to leave to understand what returning meant. In the evenings, I often walk out to the far edge of the NX grounds, past the solar irrigation tests and the children's vegetable plots to the hand-built bench Grandpa made himself. From there, the stars are clear. Real ones, not the plastic kind I once stuck to my bedroom ceiling. But they still remind me of that girl I was, the one always asking why, even when no one wanted to answer. The one who wouldn't be silenced. The one he believed in. And on nights like that, when the wind slips through the trees just so, I could swear I hear his voice in the leaves, write what they don't yet understand. One day, they will. And now at last they do.